Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our complimentary webinar, Micro Learning Gets Big. My name is David Forey, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Leading the session is David Wentworth, Principal Learning Analyst for Brandon Hall Group, and Tad Goltra, VP of Product Management at EBSCO. I would like to extend a thank you to EBSCO Corporate Solutions and Excel 5 for sponsoring today's webinar. Excel 5 is a micro-learning solution that helps employees develop critical soft skills, such as communication, teamwork, leadership, and innovation. Employees learn from the best of the best in 3 formats: videos, book summaries, and articles. Content can be consumed in 5 minutes, ideal for busy professionals from millennials to seasoned executives. And now a little bit about Brandon Hall Group. Brandon Hall Group is a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. Our vision is to inspire a better workplace experience. We have world-class research, data, and expertise across all areas of human capital management. Currently, we have open surveys in training benchmarking, succession management, and hiring and internal mobility. We would love to hear from you. In exchange, you could receive free gift cards, research, reports, and more. To participate, please visit our website, brandonhall.com, and click on Open Surveys. This presentation is being recorded. The playback and slides will be provided to everyone within 24 hours of the webinar and a follow-up email. If you would like to ask a question, please do so by typing it into the questions box for our presenters. If you'd like to download a copy of the presentation instantly, you may find it in the handout section now. And now, I'll turn it over to our presenters so we can get started.
Great, thank you, Dave, and welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us. And as David mentioned, there is that question box in your control panel. Please take advantage of it. Any questions you might have about anything that we're talking about, anything that you feel might be missing, any commentary that you'd like to make, please feel free to do so as we go, and Tad and I will both try to answer questions as we go through so that we're answering them in real time, but there will be time at the end as well to catch up to any questions we may have missed or any new questions that come in. So please take advantage of that. So this is, Tad and I wanted to talk today about micro-learning. We've heard a lot about this over the past few years, and you've heard of chunking learning or smaller learning. We're talking today using the terminology is microlearning. And I'm going to pause for one quick second. I've gotten a couple of questions in the box about the audio. I just want to make sure people have been able to log in and can hear what's happening. In fact, there's a little I believe there's a little hands up button on your control panel, and you can click on that and put your hand up if you can hear me. That way I'll know that people are actually able to hear. All right, that is helpful. Thank you. Okay, just wanted to make sure we got everybody's able to actually hear us. Okay, so essentially, what's happening here, and the reason why we're talking about this today is, things have changed quite a bit, and we've heard for years and years and years that business is changing, the organization is changing, but what's different about now is just literally the speed with which things are changing. It's everything's changing very rapidly, and we've seen organizations just over the last couple of years make these massive shifts from doing things the way essentially they've always done them in a very hierarchical way, very centered around processes, silos and everything working in the same way, to a much different way of thinking about the organization itself, right? The organizations are put together in a much more, for the terminology of a hierarchy, where things are much more interconnected as opposed to following a top-down org chart. Typically in a modern organization, nobody's really ever 1 or 2 clicks away from anybody else, and it creates a much more people-centric type of environment where collaboration happens all throughout the organization. Innovation occurs almost anywhere and doesn't get lost. It actually bubbles up to the surface, and so this creates an environment where things can happen quite rapidly, and things change, and business needs change, and it's just a very interesting environment to be in, but everything is moving quite rapidly. But so what that means is learning has to change as well, and so we're seeing that learning, and maybe a little bit more slowly than the business itself. Learning is actually changing. We're moving away from more traditional, this is the way we've always done it, you know, solely focused on delivering classes and courses, using the ADDIE model of instructional design to build our classes and courses, focus almost, completely on compliance, and also very focused on whether or not people are completing their learning, and what their grade was. We're seeing that mentality has shifted dramatically, and things are much different, right? We're looking at organizations are thinking about learning in terms of what is the experience like? What is the learner's experience? What are they, how are they interacting with the learning? We're seeing a lot more video, the social elements, the collaborative learning, being able to learn from one another and incorporate that into the overall organizational learning. A much more agile approach to design where you can build things much quicker, roll them out, and adapt them on the fly. Is serving organizations in this new environment much better. So those things have changed too, and so we're really seeing organizations take a real hard look at what is my learning strategy, what kinds of learning experiences am I delivering, am I really making the most of what I'm delivering to my learners. And there's a lot of things that are behind this shift. It's obviously there's a technological aspect to it. We'll talk a bit about that, but the fact that the technologies now exist that allow us to do this. But there's also been, let's face it, a demographic shift. And, I'm not here to tell you that the millennials are coming to take over and that we have to change everything because of the millennials. But the fact remains that they are now currently the largest generational group in the workforce. This is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And organizations have to recognize the fact that now the largest employee population they have has come into the workforce knowing nothing else but this new way of learning, right? They've sort of grown up in this digital age. This is how things work for them. And so it's not an issue of how do we change everyone's behavior and how do we change everyone's minds. It's now how do we adapt what we're doing to match the way people are already doing things, the way that they're already learning. And so while it's not necessarily the millennials' fault that all this is happening, they just happen to be at the crux of a generational shift at the time when all of this technology is coming at us so fast and so furious. And so it combines to create this element where sooner rather than later, organizations need to really come to grips with what their strategy is around learning. And I want to bring Tad in, who's joined us today, and just say, talk a little bit about what you're seeing and what your thoughts are about what this is doing to the workforce and how we approach learning with this generational shift.
Yeah, David, I think thank you, and I think you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, the statistics obviously paint one picture, and that even really is just the beginning. Over the next couple of years, it will be over 50% of the workforce will be comprised of the Millennial Generation, and then in the next 6 or 7 years, up to 75%. So at that point, basically the Millennials are the workforce, with previous generations a distinct minority. But I think that, growing up digital, being the first generation to grow up digital, really sort of is an important fact, and really sort of drives a set of implications that I know we're going to discuss in terms of, what needs are, in terms of how learning can be accomplished, what expectations are, and then, ultimately, how companies sort of adapt to meet those needs and ensure that they're able to provide learning programs that, that address the skills needs of the workforce as companies move forward in an increasingly competitive environment.
Yeah, exactly. And Pyle asks a good question. Are these stats specific to a particular region? And these are U.S.-based stats. These come from the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. So it is the U.S. workforce. But this shift is clearly happening, around the globe to varying degrees. I don't know if the numbers would line up precisely, but I think the overall trend and shift remains the same no matter where you look, really. And so, as Tad's saying, it's something that really we need to be aware of. And so sort of like give you an example of what I mean when I talk about that, this is the way, this generation comes into the workforce not knowing any other way of how to do things. here's one of the biggest things that's impacting how we create and deliver learning in an organization. And it's simply this. This is how millennials and to maybe a lesser extent everybody else gets things done now, right? This is how millennials are used to learning. If I don't know something, I Google it and now I know it. And so we've entered this age where this idea of not knowing almost doesn't exist anymore. There's very little time in a person's life now where they can honestly say, here is this piece of information that I do not know, and now I know it. Because if there's a piece of information that somebody either wants to know or needs to know in order to do their job, move on in life, get something done, whatever it happens to be, if they don't know it, they can easily find it, and then they know it. And so the challenge is that this is how people are interacting with the world around them. This is how they're gaining knowledge. They're learning through things like Google and searches. They're learning from one another. They're connected to each other. They're learning informally. They're learning from experiences. They're not necessarily learning everything they need to know from a course or a class. And so what I think the challenge for organizations is they tend to think of it like, well, we only deliver these classes and these courses, so that's how they're learning, right? That's where everyone's getting their information. But that's not the case. The case is all of this other learning is happening, whether you know it or not, or whether you're a part of it or not. So the idea is, how do we leverage the fact that this is how people learn? How can we tap into this? And so the idea is not to totally abandon the classroom. We're not going to do that. That will probably remain for years to come the number one way that we deliver learning. It has been for years. It will be for years to come. Courses aren't going to go away either, but I will say that they will look much different. They will take up a different place in the entire learning ecosystem. There'll be more things attached to them. But we need to figure out as organizations, how do we deliver this type of experience? This idea of if somebody needs to know something, they can get it quickly, and they can get it contextually, they get it where they need it, when they need it, based on who they are. Without telling somebody, well, you don't know this, no worries, we have a class set up 3 weeks from now. We'll get you enrolled, and as long as you get an 83%, then you'll know what you need to know. That's just simply not how life works anymore. So given that type of environment, just thinking of it in those terms, I did want to run a quick poll of the group here just to get a sense of the folks that are on the call. How often at your organization would you say, and obviously this is your own opinion, this is just sort of an estimate, how often do employees need to connect with learning organizations? Need to connect with learning resources at your organization in order to just do what they do, get their jobs done, be successful? How often are employees needing to connect to learning resources? So just to get a sense from the group about the frequency that these sorts of things occur or should be occurring. And we've got about half, so I'll give it another couple of seconds here. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to participate that wants to. So as you can see the responses either once a year is what they need, and maybe every 3 months or so. Perhaps they're doing it every month. But we've got pretty good response right here. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results from the group. We got about 3/4 of you, so thank you so much for doing that. And Tad, take a look at this. It's a pretty decent split across 4 of the responses. Nobody has said that it's only annually, which is good to see, because that is actually a response we see from time to time. But that's just clearly not going to get it done. But we still have about 23% of companies on the line that say, once a quarter we're connecting with learning resources. When you just look at this, Tad, what does that say to you when you see these results? Anything jump out at you?
Well, I mean, obviously there's more than half are up at the weekly or daily options, and so you see, particularly with sort of on-demand learning and just needing to be able to get quick access to information, that's key. I would suspect that the quarterly or monthly would be more around things that are, perhaps or especially quarterly, maybe compliance driven, where it doesn't need to be like every day, but you sort of need to sort of keep up with different changes and that sort of thing. I think when it comes to, though, building skills and, building soft skills in particular,
Right.
those are types of things that you want to be, engaging in frequently, because, that's just the sort of best way to, foster continuous learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on something important there, that idea that the quarterly, maybe even monthly, it could be very compliance driven. And that's probably true. And those are the types of items that maybe aren't an everyday thing. But in those organizations, the types of learning that we were describing earlier are still occurring. People are still learning things in the organization that aren't necessarily compliance driven, whether it is skills, soft skills, or just how do I do my job better, those sorts of things. And so when are they going to be able to learn those things from the organization rather than learning them on their own or finding out places to find them? So just as a point of reference, you guys answered our poll here, and we appreciate that. We saw the results. We did ask that as one of our surveys in one of our studies, and we asked organizations, how often do you expect your individual contributors, right, just everybody in the organization, leaving aside maybe executives, to connect with learning resources to do their job well, right? In order to be good at what they do, how often should be people connecting with learning? And so you saw from our group, we had about 50% say it was weekly or daily. 61% of the organizations in our study say that they need people to be connected to learning either weekly, daily, or even more often, multiple times a day, in order to be good at what they do. So if you go back and think of an organization that's delivering a majority of their learning via courses and classes, score packages, click-throughs, ILT, that kind of, you can't do that on a daily basis, let alone you can't even do that on a weekly basis, right? You can't expect someone to take a 60-minute class once a week or click through a 90-minute e-learning course every day. So if this is what people need in order to do their jobs well, how are we going to meet that need if all we're doing is pushing out courses and classes? So there's a disconnect where organizations need to figure out what goes in that space. How do we fill in that space? How do we meet the needs, the everyday needs of the learners in order to have them be good at their job? And that's really the key, right? Because learning in the traditional sense, the class, the course, feels to the learner, to the employee, feels very separate from the job. It's not the job. It's I'm doing my job, and then a little reminder pops up on your calendar that, hey, we need you to step away from your job for X amount of time to attend this training, this learning, and then you can go back to your job. And whether you've designed it that way or not, this is how it gets interpreted by the employee's brain, is they see it as, this is something separate from my job. So how do we get it so that learning is a daily thing that is part of the job? Like, in order for me to do this job, as I work and do what I need to do, I'm learning this thing here, that thing there. It's part of my job is learning these things and getting better. So we need to find a way to achieve that. And I think context is something that I mentioned earlier, and something that's really critical to getting this to work. And Tad, you have some thoughts on what we mean by context.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we've already started to touch on some of these points, but today's employees are just busier than ever, more increasing pressure on their time, more demands, more need to keep current, more projects, et cetera. But at the same time, in a competitive and changing workplace, developing new skills is critical. And that's true on both the employee side as well as the employer side. So employees need to continue to develop their skills to be successful, to meet new challenges, to advance their careers, and as well, employers are looking to raise the overall skill levels of their employees. And also, because employees are asking for opportunities to develop skills, it becomes a retention question in that programs need to be offered in order to sort of retain the best employees and and keep them evolving. And it's much more effective, both from a cost and just satisfaction perspective, to be able to retain and build your employee skill sets versus hiring new from the outside. So that's, sort of a context around just the the employer perspective and employee perspective. But we know still that the bulk of most corporate learning programs are heavily centered around in-person training, and as well as e-learning, which does usually require a pretty big time commitment. So you can see sort of the mismatch there with employees having less time, but the existing learning resources requiring pretty significant time. And then throw on top of that the fact that millennials and and increasingly all employees do have some different learning needs in terms of wanting shorter duration content, wanting to be able to direct their own learning, wanting different formats, etc. And you can sort of see that there's the mismatch between what's typically available within learning programs and what's needed, which leads to some new approaches really being needed to meet today's needs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to that skills part, you really hit on something important, that people want to be developed. And I saw a study recently among, it wasn't just solely millennials, it was a very specific slice of millennials. It was like 30 people in their 30s. And there's been a shift in the reason why people leave a job. And it used to be the number one reason why people left a job was their immediate supervisor. They just didn't like their boss. They had to deal with this person every day, didn't like it, want to move. Now, the number one reason is I'm not being developed. I don't feel like I'm growing. I'm not being developed. I want to leave because I want someone to develop me. And so it's another thing to think about is, let's be honest, not every single employee at every organization is hungering to learn and wants to grow and develop. Let's be honest, right? There's people that just want to do their job, and that's fine. But there are people that want to grow and want to develop. And you know what? They're going to do it. They're going to find ways to develop their skills and become better at what they do, whether you help them do that or not. And so that becomes back to what Tad was saying, that retention piece. Those people are typically your best employees, right? Those are the people that want to grow and learn. Those are the kind of people you want to hold on to. So if you're not giving them those opportunities, those are the people you're going to lose first. So it's really critical to be able to do that. And again, as Tad mentioned, the idea of the different learning needs. I mean, and it's not even just millennials. It's like every organization, no matter how strong your culture is, no matter how great your overall organizational culture is, it's still made up of individual people. And individual people all have different needs, different requirements, different learning styles, regardless of their generation. And being able to offer a learning environment that can meet more than one learning need is going to be critical in that situation. And Susan, I felt bad as I was mentioning that study because I didn't put it in here and I don't have it at the tip of my fingers. But I tell you what, I've got your name here asking the question about where did I get the data about the number one reason people leave their orgs. I will look it up and I will get it back to you. But it's I almost want to say it's Forbes, but I'm not 100% sure, so I don't want to say that definitively. But yeah, it's something that's out there. I did read it. It's like number one reason why people in the 30s leave a job. I think that's literally the search you can use to find it. And they even split it by men and women in that, and the development was number one for women and number two for men, but put it overall, it was number one. So yeah, I will try to make sure we get a hold of that information and get it out there too. So thanks, folks, for asking about that. All right, so all these things we're talking about, right? How do we do this? How do we start thinking about that? Well, we have to start thinking about learning as having a different DNA than it's typically had, right? You saw earlier, I talked about that move away from the ADDIE model, the very rigid, long, drawn-out instructional design process where you go through each stage and make sure you cross all the T's and dot the I's before you roll it out. It's a solid design practice from one standpoint, but it won't get it done in this new way of thinking. They can work side by side though, but the idea is we have to think about learning just completely differently. So going back to making learning part of the job, making it and Chad came to the rescue. Before I go any further, I'm gonna copy this, or somebody can on the one of my panelists can copy this in the question box. Chad put in the link to Business Insider. If we could somehow copy that and send that out to everybody, like put it in the chat section and everyone will see it, that would be great. Okay, so the learning DNA is changing. So in order to meet this need, in order to make learning be a part of the job, it has to be something different. So what does it have to be? Well, these are the characteristics that we found in talking to organizations and going through our studies. These are the types of characteristics that this type of learning typically has. So it's contextual, right? So instead of this big one-size-fits-all, here's your learning, take it or leave it, there is an aspect of it that's more contextual, right? The learning has meaning to me based on my role, my actual physical location, what my actual development path is, where I'm headed. So when I'm getting access to learning, I'm being presented with materials, I sort of inherently understand why. It makes sense to me when I look at it because it has something to do with who I am and what I do, as opposed to, here's a bunch of stuff, take it. So either that it does a lot of things. It improves effectiveness. It increases engagement and adoption because it resonates more. Something that we're clearly talking about today. It's small, right? So let's think small, and we're going to get a little bit more into the micro part of this. We're setting the stage as to why things need to get smaller, but for all of these things to work, learning has to be, this type of learning has to be smaller. So short videos, quick updates, stuff that fits within the workday, stuff that I can quickly look at when I need it. You think about the way people interact with technology in their daily lives. It's in and out, in and out, in and out, quick checks at things. You look at videos that are on the net, things that people post to Facebook that are entertaining, they're seconds long, and they'll tell an entire story in a matter of seconds, beginning, middle, end. And so this is what people are used to, how they're used to absorbing information. We don't need to start thinking that way. Obviously, it's the informal part of it, right? We can't just continually set up all of these rules and parameters around everything and kill everything with scheduling. There has to be this sort of ad hoc nature to it of, I can do it when I do it. I can do it whenever, any day, every day, whatever it happens to be. And then the mobile part makes a lot of this really work, right? So now it's not just I can only do it when I'm sitting down at my desk looking at my computer. I can do it when and where I need to. Or maybe I work in a place where I'm not sitting at a desk all day. I could be on a shop floor. I could be on the road, whatever it happens to be. I still need to be able to connect with this stuff on a regular basis. How am I going to do it unless you put it in my pocket? So we really have to start to think about the mobile aspect of it. And the social element too is it tends to get, social learning was still talked about. I think it's as a terminology, it's kind of falling out of favor. But what to me it means, it isn't so much about being social, because I think that's the word that sort of denigrates it a little bit. It's collaborative. It's allowing learners to learn from one another, like to communicate about things, to check in with one another, to find each other experts among themselves, who knows what. I mean, when we attend a learning event, right, like I said, ILT will still be the main way we deliver learning, right? That's going to go on. If you attend ILT, one of the first things that happens when you walk out of the classroom is people will talk to one another about what they just sat through. That right there is collaborative learning. Suddenly I'm getting a new perspective on something that somebody else had that I didn't have, and now I'm thinking about things maybe a little differently. If we're not allowing that kind of interaction to happen, if we're not only allowing it, but facilitating it, and even more than that, if we're not tracking and measuring those types of interaction, we're missing out on a huge part of learning. So we have to be able to bring that stuff in order to make all this work. So those are the characteristics that we found as we talk to organizations that say they're having success in doing this type of stuff and delivering this kind of learning. And then we see that based in our actual hard data from our surveys. We asked companies in our most recent learning technology survey, what are the top initiatives your organization has in learning that are going to, what are the most important initiatives, I'm sorry, I used the terminology correctly, the most important initiatives that your organization has for learning that are going to help you achieve your business goals, right? This isn't just about making learning better, making learning more fun, whatever it is. These are the things that companies say are important to them in order to achieve their business goals. So you can see here, these are all the responses that I've got listed here. More than 50%, if you add them up, say it's either important or critical. I've circled two of the ones that are really specific to what we're talking about today. Creating smaller content objects, right? So about 55% of companies say it's either important or critical that they create smaller content objects. And then slightly more say that it's important to them to revise existing content for new modalities, right? Like, what do we already have? How can we reuse this instead of starting over from scratch? There's got to be some good stuff in here. How do we deliver that in these new ways? So companies are really focused on that. But if you look down even further, increasing the amount of informal learning and increasing the amount of experiential on-the-job learning, right? very, very important to organizations in order to meet their business goals. We have to move away from the formal, the course and the class. We're going to still do it, but we need to do more informal, everybody learning from one another, all the things that we sort of just talked about, as well as the experiential, which is that, learn by doing, trial and error, that sort of thing. So, and Tad, I know you work a lot with organizations and talking to prospects and clients and who are trying to put together their learning strategy and try to deliver this stuff. What are you hearing about, from organizations when they come to you and they're saying, hey, look, here's what we're trying to accomplish? What are some of the things that they're trying to do?
It's interesting looking at these. It's very consistent with what we hear from our customers. Just the ones you have circled, obviously, creating more bite-sized content, et cetera, leveraging existing investments. No one does want to start from scratch. There's a lot of good content out there. But also, I think closely related is increasing informal learning, where you see that, informal learning does tend to be smaller, more bite-sized, and sort of more on-demand, while you're working, being able to look something up, get some quick information, get a quick, lesson on something, to help maybe with it could be from anything from a performance review to doing, solving a problem of some sort, et cetera. But these are the sort of pressing concerns that are out there, and that employees are looking for solutions to, and hence learning professionals are I think seeing that, and it's reflected in the stats here. When you add up those numbers, they're, like you said, all above 50%, but some of them are getting up into the high 60s and 70s. So it's fairly universal in terms of just cutting across the entire learning in general, and companies across the board.
No, exactly. And so, we see that this is what companies it's on their mind. People are thinking about it. This is we've got to move in this direction. And many of you might be here on the line thinking, yeah, that's great. We think that too, but, we're just not doing it. I don't know if we're going to be able to do it. So here's sort of my good news, bad news slide for you. Is that same study, we asked organizations, how prepared are you to execute on any of these things? And the list is a little bit longer because there were more things in it than that we asked about, but in that previous slide, I just wanted to show the top ones. But we asked companies, how ready are you to actually do something about these things that you consider to be important or critical? And so it was like a 5-point scale, and what I'm showing you here is either end of the scale. The red is companies that said, we are not at all prepared to do anything about this yet. It's important, it's critical, we understand it, we are not ready to do anything. And then the green is, not only are we prepared, but we're ready to actually do something, like tomorrow. We are ready to take action. And so what you can see here is the massive gaps in some of these around, things like games and gamification, or increasing learner-contributed content, which is something we're seeing, more and more. Companies just aren't ready to do it yet for a variety of reasons. They don't know how to manage it. They don't know how to keep control of it. They don't have the technology in place to enable it. One that blows me away is incorporating mobile delivery. 38% of companies still saying they're not prepared to take on mobile delivery, when if you step outside of the organization for 5 seconds, you'll realize that 80% of what happens in a person's life happens on their mobile device. The fact that companies are yet to figure out, how do we just put some learning in people's hands? There's a lot of reasons. There's just technology reasons. There's rules reasons. Hey, we've got a bunch of salaried employees. We can't have them taking training off hours, or we're going to get sued like Microsoft did, or a bunch of others. But we're talking now over 10 years since the first iPhone came out, and we're still grappling with, as far as learning is concerned, how do we do this? You look at other parts of the organization, look at sales, look at marketing, and they'd look at you like you were crazy if you said that you were still trying to figure out your mobile strategy. So you can see a big disconnect there. But going back to those two things that I highlighted earlier that have to do with this idea of creating these smaller learning experiences that you can insert into people's everyday lives. it gets a little better, but there's still nearly a quarter of companies say we want to do this, but we're just not yet prepared to create smaller content objects. 20% say they're not ready to do anything about new modalities, adapting their current content. And so just to give you a sense of, this is the reason why I say good news, bad news, is I typically hear from people that say, oh good, we're not the only ones that aren't ready. But it's a little telling that given the criticality of some of these things, how many organizations are not ready to do anything on that. While we're on here, Tom asked a question regarding mobile. You need to consider whether or not hourly employees have the ability to participate in a bring your own device program, right? That was sort of what I was touching on there, is that you've got these employees that aren't salaried that I can't have, working off hours, or anytime they're doing anything related to work, they're on the clock. How do we manage that? And companies are trying to figure that out, and they're creating, times and places for employees to connect with the learning that fall within the right rules. But that is a challenge that those particular organizations have to overcome for sure. So the reason why we're talking so much about this microlearning and why it's so important, and especially given that ILT is probably not going anywhere for any time soon, I come back to this Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, and I don't know how many folks on the line are super familiar with it, but it's been around since the 1800s. This isn't recent, but it holds true. And the idea is that based on the observations, that within a matter of days of attending a formal learning event, an in-person instructor-led classroom training event, so to say, for example, people forget almost everything that was delivered in that environment within a matter of days. And this is what you're up against. And you would think, well, that's from the 1800s, it's out of date. But do you think, have our days gotten any more easier than then, or more complex since then? The amount of things that we deal with on a daily basis, I would guess that our lives have become a bit more complex since this first came out. And so I would say that the idea that we only forget 70% of everything within a month is probably pretty charitable. It's probably a lot worse than that. But this is what we're up against. How do we, if all we're doing is delivering classes, think of all the time, money, and energy spent in creating an amazing learning program, some great class, or even a course that you've put together, and how proud you are of it and get people through it, and then it turns out they're really not remembering anything. So we have to find ways to revisit this material all during that curve and beyond, to keep it from falling off like this. Like, hey, remember this? Hey, how about you watch this video and it refreshes this? Maybe do this little exercise that puts it into practice. Things that you can do to insert in the daily lives of employees so that they don't just forget everything that you've delivered to them. So this is a pretty big hurdle for companies to overcome, and you can't do it without some sort of microlearning, however you want to define it, but that's what organizations need to start doing. So like I said, it isn't that, or I'm on here and Tad and I are saying, guess what, blow up every single course you have and cancel all your classes. We're just going to deliver microlearning from now on. It's not it. It all works together, right? The classes and the courses are necessary, and they I don't want to say serve their purpose, because it makes it sound like that's utilitarian. They could be great and super effective. They should be done well, and there's different ways to do them, but they're an integral, necessary, sort of central part of the learning environment. But then what you've got is all the other stuff, right? You could quiz people on it, refreshing videos, give them an activity to do, a game to participate in that calls back upon the stuff, and that's where you get the idea of the micro and the macro learning, right? They go hand in hand, they work together. So as you have these peaks and valleys of macro learning, because they can only occur, say, quarterly, monthly, maybe, then what happens in the in-betweens? And that's where all the micro stuff comes in. And Tad, talk a little bit about some of the other types of micro learning, or the way that it fits into the overall ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that jumps out at me is it's, like you said, it's not an either-or situation. It's a yes and situation. Mm-hmm. And so, but I mean, different people have very different learning styles, and, certain types of content, certain formats will resonate with those people more than other types. And so having, many different options available, I think is key to, to ensuring that that learning needs get met. And I think you've got some of the big ones here, with video, with games, quizzes, etc. There are also, some people want to interact with shorter text-based content or perhaps audio, listening to a podcast, those sorts of things. But the key is, I think providing opportunities to reinforce the learning with related content. That's how, you sort of help boost retention and, and overcome that rather depressing curve, the Ebbinghaus curve up above. But I think it's certainly something that, that can be addressed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so, overall, what are obviously we've talked a bit about the reasons why and the benefits to be reaped from thinking like this and trying to deliver this type of learning. But, to boil it down, just for the learners, it's about ease of access. I don't have to really think about, did I log into the right system? Do I have the right thing on my schedule? Am I downloading the right course? How much time do I have to click through it? Did I set aside enough time? It's just about, look, I need this thing, I'm going to get it, here it is. Even more so than that, it's, I didn't even know I needed this thing and it got pushed to me and now I realize I need it, right? So there's that ease of access. It fits more into the natural learning patterns that people have, the way they interact with the world around them. We're trying to fit that. See, that's the big change is, the traditional way that technology used to dictate how we learned, right? This is, hey, we've got this LMS and here's the things it does, so that's what we're going to do and that's how we're going to learn because that's what our technology does, and that's it. And it worked, but that was sort of the limitation. We're now in a place where there's so many different types of technologies that do so many different types of things, we can actually build these very customized ecosystems that now fit, that allow the learning to dictate the technology. You see, like it's matching up a little bit better with the way people naturally learn. We're able to deliver more personalization. Now, I don't think in an organization of 25,000 people you're going to expect to deliver super hyper personalized learning to each individual. But it comes back to that idea of context, being contextual, right? It's meaningful to me. There's a reason why I'm looking at this. There's a reason why this is showing up for me. And then, of course, the moment of need, right? That's the big thing is, I need this now, let me have it. If I don't have what I need when I need it, I'm not going to be able to do my job. And then for the organization itself, you start to deliver in these ways, and soon you're very focused on delivering very effective, meaningful things in these short bursts. And so you're starting to focus less on the transactional stuff, like the bulky transactional content that you've been building. And so that gives the organization, the learning organization, a little bit more time to think strategically. And because you're bringing learning closer to the point of performance, right? The point of performance is the person actually doing the job. Because you're able to bring learning closer to that point, you at least have the ability to create a stronger link to the business. It also relies on your ability to create a learning strategy that's tied to the business, that follows down the chain of why you're using the technologies, what outcomes you're trying to achieve by delivering the learning, which is 3 or 4 other workshops and webinars. But being able to bring learning down to that point means you now have that connection. You have that line to the employees at the point of performance that allow you to create a stronger link to the business and also a stronger link just to the employees, between learning and employees. So it's not like, oh, learning is this separate thing that I have to do. There's more of a connection to the employees, which is very important. So one of the great reasons that we have Tad with us is because he brings with him obviously the experience of executing this stuff, right? I'm talking all theoretically and conceptually, but Tad spends his time putting this stuff into practice and helping organizations actually do this very thing. So I want to let Tad take a minute here and talk a little bit about what does this kind of look like, how do you do it, and again, we've been doing a great job, great questions coming in. Any other questions that you have about how this gets done or what it looks like, feel free to put them in there, and I'll be sure to either answer or ask Tad. So feel free to use those questions some more, but I'm going to hand it over to Tad for now.
Great. So thanks, Dave. So the first thing is that this isn't a sort of one solution situation. There are sort of many different possibilities depending on, what a particular learning environment might look like, and what the needs are, what the focus is in terms of content, et cetera. So we'll look at a few different possibilities just to spur some thinking for each of you. So this is just a screenshot of a LMS, and it's in this case set up for course delivery for formal courses, and I think the LMSs do a great job of delivering formal courses and all the tracking and assignments and et cetera that are needed to keep up with with coursework that's needed to be completed. However, when employees think about their LMS, it's not necessarily sort of the first place that they're going to think of if they want to, maybe have an immediate learning need, or want to spend 10 minutes learning about something new, et cetera. It's not always the most sort of engaging platform, and doesn't necessarily always have the most fresh content that they might be looking for. Nonetheless, it's tried and true, and a key part, if not sort of the key part for most learning programs in terms of a platform for hosting learning content. There are some options, though, to supplement the LMS, even adding content within the LMS. So in this case, you see the typical an LMS landing page with some assignments and what's been completed, history, et cetera. But then you also see in the middle here a carousel with some book jackets on some recently published business books, or summaries of recently published business books. And those can be aligned to a particular competency or learning objective, and it's a way of essentially getting some fresh content into an LMS, without building all new courses, et cetera, but just sort of supplementing the courses with some additional resources that may be relevant or of interest to employees. And that's, able to be tracked, et cetera, from within the LMS, as some companies prefer for all learning activities, or as many as possible, to be trackable and available from within the LMS. A slightly different approach is to make learning resources available from within a SharePoint portal or a company's intranet portal. In this case, we're looking at a major telecom provider, and they have a bunch of different content available from within their intranet, stock price, news, et cetera, some offers to employees. But then down in the lower right, you can see some articles are highlighted related to, in this case, leadership and developing leadership skills, et cetera. And so that's something that, by making content available from within the workflow that employees are already engaging with, and it might in fact be their homepage for when they first come in and log in the morning, where their browser sort of goes to first. Then you're incorporating learning into the workflow without requiring sort of going somewhere else that may not be top of mind for employees. Then another option still is more of a standalone portal where a broader set of microlearning content can be made available. can be organized again by different competencies, whether it's around just business fundamentals or around leadership or around sort of personal effectiveness or whatever other topics or competencies might be of interest, to be able to access fresh content daily, videos, etc., book summaries. But then this can be also made available from links from an LMS or from a SharePoint or other platform. And what this can provide is, or something along these lines, is fresh content and sort of the ability to foster continuous learning by making a larger set of content available to meet different needs, across the spectrum.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting is you mentioned SharePoint, and I think a lot of organizations, these are the ones that I talk to, SharePoint always comes up and as a solution where, well, we've got all this stuff, and we've got great content, and we keep it, and we manage it ourselves because we have a SharePoint. And in all of those conversations I have, I end up finding out that basically SharePoint is the place where content goes to die. It just goes there, and no one knows where it is. No one knows how to find it. It's impossible to sort of look through, and so that's where the platform like this, where you've got the standalone, can surface the relevant, fresh, new content in a way that it is, with an interface that people are used to working with, right? There's no guessing how this thing works, right? It opens up, I look at it, I know what I'm seeing, I know where I can go, I know what I can do, where I think SharePoint ends up frustrating a lot of end users, and companies use it from a purely business standpoint of, hey, it's Microsoft, we're an Office shop, so everything we've got is Office, we've already got it, it's free, it'll take us nothing to put anything in there, and then it goes in there and no one ever uses it, and then they blame the content and say, our stuff is no good, no one wants to look at it. So that's where, something like this, where you need that extra shove to sort of surface the content and really put it in people's lives, because, I mean, we said before, already with learning, you're sort of asking people to step outside their job for a minute. If you're going to make them hunt for it, and go digging through a SharePoint site, it's a pretty big ask. So it's important to think about that end user experience when it comes to this stuff. You can't just simply have, whether you build all this stuff or you subscribe to this stuff, this type of microlearning, and make it available, it's how is it available. And so, Tad's shown some examples of, regardless of the type of environment that you want to use, if you want everything to flow through your LMS, great, that's fine. These types of platforms, this platform allows you to plug that in, so it's part of that experience. Same thing with the portal, or if you want to use it as a standalone. So that's really the key. And looking at this, Tad, it actually made me think of something, because you show the example of like book summaries or articles or videos. What's the type of microlearning that is most often requested when you're working with companies? What's the thing that they're looking for the most of?
Well, it's interesting. I would say lately it's been around video content, because I think that as we saw the stats on the millennials, and video really seems to resonate, and so having fresh video content is key. But I think it's more than just fresh video content, because there's a lot of video that's out there, on the web. But it's also sort of it's key that it be short and actionable. Those are two key things, because patience is not unlimited, and you've got to really get in there and sort of present content that's engaging and that is sort of actionable in order to keep the user engaged. And they're not just going to sit there and watch a 20-minute or hour-long video, right? 3 to 4 minutes is probably all you've got, and you've got to make sure that any learning is contained within that time frame. So I think that's that's absolutely key. But we also see a lot of interest in audio and in the text content, for people who are traveling, et cetera. If they want to just keep up with the latest business thinking, they might want to read an article or a book summary in order to do that. So it really, I think different needs for different styles of learning is key, and being able to offer more than one option, I think, is key.
Yeah, and you know, between the two of us, we've sort of touched on all of these types of considerations, the things to think about when you think about these things. But one I wanted to just highlight here is, and Tad gave some great reasons for this. It's more than just short, right? It isn't just, oh, microlearning. Well, we just got to make everything smaller. Make the videos short. That is just simply one element of it. But if it isn't relevant, if it isn't actionable, then it's just short and it's not really achieving any goal. So you can't just simply come at it from we just have to make things smaller. It has to be done in a strategic, smart way. So definitely put that level of thought into it when you go. But the actions, like what are some of the things that we can do? Like what are some of the things I can try to do as I start to think about this? Well, assess the current content. What do you currently have? What can be repurposed? You know, how does your most critical material exist today? Is there a way that you can pull out the most important stuff? Because let's think about it. One of the pushbacks, and Tad, I'm sure you've heard this, is, well, the stuff we do, it's just far too complex. It can't be micro-learning. There's just too much going on. It's too complex. But think of the way people operate, the way people think. When you're presented with something complex, what do you naturally do? You break it down into parts that you can manage without trying to do the entire thing all at once. It's the same thing with the learning. If the learning is complex, if it's a complex concept, that doesn't mean that it can't be broken down into smaller components that add up to the original complexity. And then also just thinking about what needs to be new. Where can we start thinking about this stuff moving forward with new stuff? Assessing your audience, looking within the organization, what are the learning preferences? Maybe do a climate survey, or maybe as part of an overall organizational climate survey, sneak in some questions about learning preferences. Mobile devices, what do people have in their pocket? What do they have on their desk? Is your organization mostly prefer to use tablets? Do they have iPhones? Do they have Android? You know, just to get an idea of what's going on with mobile use. If there's very little mobile use or very little interest in it, maybe don't spend a lot of time and money and effort going down that road. And also understanding what are the generations within my workforce, right? What is the breakdown of my company? Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do one thing or the other once you have that information, but it's good to know what you're dealing with and how to think about these things. And then as you do these things, it's, you know, we're talking about micro-learning, small, well, start small. Pilot programs, just do little things. Try with small groups, small projects. Try to feed this stuff out there and see what the reactions are. As you do it with small, it's easy to get feedback and say, okay, well, we missed a little bit here. If we fix that, if we change that, it's much easier to adapt not only the small learning, but the small groups. It's easy to do that on the fly. And then as you have success, build on that and roll those parts of it. But just wanted to touch on some things that, you know, you can start to think about now if you're not currently doing this. And we did manage to save some time. We got a few questions here, Ted, at the end. Let's see, one of the things, how do you create the pull for microlearning in an organization that might be, you know, not so mature on the scale of learning maturity? So there's a couple things there. There's two aspects to that. One is it's the learners themselves, right? If you know, you might not have a whole lot of control of the types of learners that you have. If your organization doesn't have people who are looking to learn, don't have the desire, if you're not hiring for that skill, it might be hard sometimes to create that pull. It might take a little bit more effort, and that's where, you know, the organizational side comes in. It's about, you know, momentum. It's about marketing. If you are rolling this stuff out, make a splash. Let everyone know it's available and why and what it means to them. And, you know, use examples. And, you know, I talk to companies when they do new things like this, and they just, even a short video from the CEO saying, hey, man, this is what we're doing, and here's why, and really excited. It's enough to get people to start to, you know, to participate and get active and start looking for the stuff. But there, you know, there is some effort up front if it's something that you haven't done before, for awareness, for engagement, and adoption, right? Get people aware that it's going on and all the great reasons why it's important and meaningful, and then, you know, get them engaged in it through whatever means, and then there's the actual adoption piece. So there is some definite work there, and depending on your organization, it could be more work or less work, depending on who you're dealing with. Another question we had was, do we have any strategies or tips on closing the knowledge gap in trudging through knowledge and info, right? So yeah, so we're inundated on a daily basis with knowledge. So, you know, people can know that these resources of information exist, and the stuff is always changing, but how do you synthesize that information to reduce the gap in knowing how to effectively apply that information? So essentially, and hopefully I'm interpreting your question correctly, Colby, but the idea is that, you know, we're bombarded on a daily basis with information. Even when we're looking for specific stuff, you get a lot of information back. How do you work with that so that the right stuff is being consumed and acted upon. And that is a challenge, right? It goes back to the Google thing. Not only are people using that Google approach to learn, but who knows what they're getting. And that's sort of where our curation element comes in. So, a platform like Excel 5 and others, you've got parameters in there that you're sort of managing the channels of what's going in there and what's being presented, whatever it happens to be. But their organizations are going to have to get good at curation. They're going to have that skill set that says, all of this stuff is out there, we only really need this, and here's the stuff we're going to use. And so there's levels, right? There's the internet at large, right? The Google approach, which is just everything. But then there are specific content providers, and there are many, many, many of them, and a lot of companies use multiple. And so they have their levels of curation, right? They put things together in channels and topic areas, and so you can use that. And then, internally, knowing your own audience, there has to be someone who's got, or a team that has the ability to know how to take that and curate it maybe even one more step, so that it's being filtered. But, that's to say that it's not a challenge that most companies face. I mean, Tad, do you talk to companies about that, about like just the sheer volume of stuff that's available, especially because you guys deal in, articles and book summaries? I mean, there's just got to be so much.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question that companies are concerned about that, and I think you hit the nail on the head around curation and sort of aligning the most relevant content to particular learning objectives or particular competencies. Maybe selecting a subset of content that is relevant to to those top competencies that you're interested in in developing within your company. So there is just an endless supply of content on the internet, but it's not particularly curated or authoritative, sort of, or best practices. It's a little bit hit or miss, and so having the more vetted and sort of premium options, I think, is key to ensuring you've got a broad set of content that is going to be relevant to your audience and sort of effective in terms of the time that they're investing in their learning and in keeping them engaged. Right? Yeah. By providing high quality content, you keep employees engaged and you keep them coming back, interested in coming back for more.
Yeah, and the audience themselves plays a large role in that. They know, for the most part, people know garbage when they see it, and you can rely on the wisdom of the crowd to help with that. I mean, I think there's something weird where organizations hire these people, and they think we hire the best people, we have the best acquisition process, and we hire only the smartest people. And then once they work there, they're afraid to let them make any decisions or think for themselves. But use the smart people that you've hired to recognize, hey, this maybe is missing the mark, and allow them to comment on it or downvote or what have you. And you'll start to find quickly that the good stuff rises to the top. We're over the hour, but there's another good question. So if you want to just stick around just another couple minutes, but there's another good question about learner-generated content, which is great, about the production quality level of videos and whether or not they should be accepted. And I think that's a great question, because organizations are sometimes hesitant because they're like, well, no, videos need to be shot in a production studio, high-quality camera, and so forth. They have to look super slick. And on the one hand, there are definitely reasons to do that, and there's definitely places where that makes sense. You want to have that nice, super-produced, slick look for that, just that next level of content. But at the same time, if you want that user-generated content, that's that quick stuff, that peer-to-peer stuff, yeah, people are shooting them on their iPhones, like you said in your question, Rick, and that's perfectly okay. Especially, you can say that it's a low-fidelity iPhone, but in reality, essentially everyone's carrying a high-def camera in their pocket. I mean, you can get some pretty good footage on an Android or an iPhone, but what you're doing is you're connecting the learners to one another. They're not expecting that the guy that works down the hall from them is going to show up on a movie set with a green screen and have lasers in his video. They want to know the answer to the question, and so it just comes down to your corporate culture. Are you willing to put that stuff out there and let them share and learn from one another? Because it's super resourceful and effective. People like to learn from one another. It makes it just that much more relevant when it feels like it's coming from a natural place and one of their partners. So that's where it comes from. And as Rick says, that you know, what's acceptable, the choice in what's acceptable quality will directly influence cost and how much content can be shared. That's probably true too. So yeah. And then, as Tom added in, agreed, it advocates a speed to market delivery, right? So yeah, shoot the thing, put it up there, it's available. And companies are having a lot of success with that, you know, that idea of like, instead of waiting for someone to run into someone in a hallway and say, hey, you know, you had some trouble with this project management thing, what did you do? And then the person says, well, here's how I solved it. And then that interaction is gone forever. Only one person benefited from it, and it never exists again. If you allow someone to say, hey, here's a challenge that I ran into, here's how I managed it, in a short how-to video, you put that up in the site, and now it's available for everybody. So you know, there's a lot going on there, and a lot of this stuff can be easily incorporated into these other feeds of standard content, right? Side by side. All the videos can be in the same library, sorted in different ways, but it isn't necessarily about having a whole other separate platform for it. All this stuff can feed into the same place and be accessed in the ways that Tad was showing in all these different, you know, through the LMS, through a portal, whatever you want. You can, you know, it all works together. Tad, so that was all the questions that came in, and we did go over the hour, so I appreciate everyone sticking around to hear the answers to the questions. Was there anything, any sort of parting words you wanted before we let everyone go?
No, I just appreciate everyone's, you know, joining us today. This is a topic that's, you know, close to our heart, and, you know, I think microlearning is increasing in importance, as we can see, you know, both in the statistics that we looked at earlier, but also just the, you know, the relevance to today. And I would say that, you know, of course, we'd be interested in hearing from anyone who might have follow-up questions or want to learn more about EBSCO and Excel 5, but also just more generally, because we always like to, you know, keep on top of best practices and what people are seeing out there and engage in dialogue in that vein.
Great. And so, yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for all the questions. We love it when you guys ask and talk to us. So, and Tad, thanks so much for joining, and thanks to EBSCO and Excel 5 for putting this on for us. And we will see everybody on the next one we do. Thank you.